The GOAT debate has been going on for decades. Every fan has an opinion. Every pundit has a list. Every barbershop, every locker room, every comment section, everyone thinks they know who the greatest football player of all time really is. But what if we ask something that has no favorite team, no nostalgia, no bias for the era it grew up in? What if we let artificial intelligence settle this once and for all? That's exactly what I did. I asked 5 of the biggest AIs on the planet to rank the top 20 greatest players in football history. Grok, ChatGPT, Google Gemini, DeepSeek, and LuChat. 5 different systems, 5 different training sets, 5 different ways of processing millions of articles, stats, and trophies. And the result they came up with will surprise you. Because the player they put at number 1 is not the one most fans expect. And the player they placed at 4th is somebody a lot of people would swear belongs in the top 3. Now, if you're already thinking AI doesn't know football, stick around for the next couple minutes. What you'll see is that these systems don't argue with emotion. They argue with data. Titles, Ballon d'Ors, World Cups, Champions Leagues, goals, assists, historical impact, longevity, everything on the table. And that's what makes this list so uncomfortable for some fans. Because the numbers say things that hurt. Here is how the experiment works. I gave every AI the same prompt. Rank the 20 greatest football players ever, based on stats, trophies, and any other factor you consider relevant. Complete freedom, no hints from me, no favorite eras suggested. Each pick gets points. The 20th place is worth 1 point. The 19th is worth 2. And so on, all the way up to the number 1 spot, which gets 20 points. At the end, we add everything up and get the definitive ranking, the one built by the collective judgment of 5 artificial intelligences. And before we start, let me warn you, this list will make you angry. Some legends who feel like automatic top 10 in your heart are going to appear way lower than you think. Icons that fans consider untouchable are going to get less than half the points of someone who never even won a Ballon d'Or. 2 of the biggest names in modern football are going to fight for a spot that neither one of them, deep down, is really comfortable with. And the final top 3 is going to end with a photo finish so tight that even the AIs cannot agree. If you love football, if you love that endless debate about who is really the best, this video is your seat at the front row of the strangest jury ever assembled. Because for the first time, machines are going to tell us who the GOAT of football really is. And they are going to do it with cold, brutal logic. So let's kick off with the votes for the 20th place. And right out of the gate, we already have a controversial pick because Grok chose Kylian Mbappe in the top 20 of all time. Yeah, Mbappe, a guy who just turned 27, ranked above legends who won multiple World Cups. Meanwhile, ChatGPT went in a completely different direction and voted for Luka Modric, the Croatian playmaker who beat Messi and Cristiano for a Ballon d'Or in 2018. Google Gemini gave its vote to Xavi Hernandez, the brain of that untouchable Barcelona era. And the French AI LuChat and DeepSeek both chose the same name, Lev Yashin, the legendary Soviet goalkeeper, the only keeper in history to ever win a Ballon d'Or. Yashin gets 2 votes right away. He starts this ranking with 2 points, while the others collect 1 each. And if you think starting a top 20 greatest players ever with a goalkeeper is strange, wait until you see where he ends up in the final list. Because in the very next spot, at number 19, Yashin shows up again. 2 more votes. And that's when things start getting really interesting. Because for these AIs, the greatest player of all time might not be who your gut is telling you it is. Back to the 19th spot. Yashin picks up 2 more votes from LuChat and Gemini, which pushes him to 6 points and keeps him firmly at the top of the ranking for now. Grok, in the meantime, decided the 19th greatest player of all time is Paolo Maldini, the Italian defender who won 5 Champions Leagues with Milan and played at the highest level of European football for more than 2 decades. DeepSeek went with Ronaldinho Gaucho, the Brazilian magician who won a World Cup in 2002, a Ballon d'Or, a FIFA World Player Award, and made an entire generation of kids want to play football just because of the way he smiled on the pitch. And ChatGPT surprised everybody by putting Xavi Hernandez here too, which means Xavi already grabs points in 2 different positions. Now let me stop for a second. Paolo Maldini and Ronaldinho showing up at 19th in the ranking of the greatest players ever? That is genuinely shocking. Maldini is a 5-time Champions League winner, one of the most respected defenders in history, still considered by many the perfect model of a modern center-back. Ronaldinho was a Ballon d'Or, a World Cup winner, and for 2 years the most magical player on the planet. Putting them at 19th means the AIs are already telling us that the depth of football history is heavier than we assume. Every legend fights for space here. After these votes, the leaderboard now looks like this. Yashin sits alone in front with 6 points. Xavi jumps to 3 points thanks to the second nod from ChatGPT. Ronaldinho and Maldini share 2 points each. Everybody else stays at 1. And we are still only at the beginning of this ride. Now for the 18th greatest player of all time. Ronaldinho comes back into the picture, this time chosen by Grok. Google Gemini picked Lothar Matthäus, the German midfielder who won a World Cup as captain in 1990, took home a Ballon d'Or, and became the first player in history to play in 5 different World Cups. ChatGPT threw a new name into the pool with Andrés Iniesta, the Spanish maestro who scored the goal that won the World Cup final in 2010 and lifted for Champions Leagues with Barcelona. DeepSeek voted for Marco van Basten, the Dutch striker who won 3 Ballon d'Ors and had one of the most beautiful volleys ever scored in a European Championship final. And Luchat quietly threw its vote to Franco Baresi, another Italian defensive icon. So at this point the ranking already looks a lot more crowded. Yashin still leads with 6 points. Ronaldinho climbs to 5. Maldini stays at 2. Xavi keeps his 3. And a bunch of new names now fight for room at the bottom of the table. 3 points each for Matthäus, Iniesta, Van Basten, and Baresi. The pattern is starting to appear. Every AI has its own historical bias, and that is exactly what makes this experiment fascinating. Now for the 17th place, we get chaos again because none of the AIs can agree. Grok voted for Xavi. DeepSeek went with Maldini. ChatGPT surprised everybody by picking Roberto Baggio, the Italian genius who won the 1993 Ballon d'Or and helped Italy reach a World Cup final that ended painfully on a penalty missed by Baggio himself. Gemini went for Zico, maybe not as famous in Europe, but a Brazilian legend who scored over 500 goals for Flamengo and is considered by many the best attacking midfielder of his generation. And Luchat, once again a little suspicious, gave its vote to another French name, Michel Platini, but hold on to that name because he'll show up a lot more soon. Each of them collects 4 points for this position. And when we recalculate the standings, Xavi jumps to 7, Maldini climbs to 6, Baggio and Zico and Platini all enter the race with 4 points each. Yashin is still up front with 6, but the gap has shrunk. And the surprises are only starting. Now, for the 16th greatest player of all time, the AIs almost reached a consensus for the first time in this experiment. Grok, ChatGPT, and DeepSeek all voted for the same name, Andrés Iniesta. 3 of the 5 most powerful AIs on the planet, at the same time, deciding that Iniesta belongs here. That is a huge vote of confidence, and it makes sense when you look at his trophy cabinet. A World Cup with a goal in the final. 2 European Championships. For Champions Leagues. 9 La Liga titles. He was the calm inside every storm at Barcelona. Grok clearly rated Iniesta higher than Xavi and Ronaldinho, which is already a debate on its own. The ones who disagreed were Luchat, voting once more for Ronaldinho, and Google Gemini, which threw the name of Gerd Müller into the ring. Müller played between the 60s and 70s and scored more than 500 goals for Bayern Munich. He won a World Cup, a European Championship, 3 straight European Cups. A total goal machine. His name is going to keep echoing throughout this list. With those votes, the numbers explode. Iniesta jumps from 3 points all the way to 18 and rockets to the top of the ranking. Yashin, who had been leading up until now, is left behind. Ronaldinho climbs to 10. Maldini reaches 9. Xavi sits at 7. And this is where the ranking starts feeling like a real competition. If you're enjoying this experiment so far, do me one small favor and hit the like button. It sounds simple, but the like is what tells YouTube that this kind of deep football breakdown deserves to reach more fans. Just a quick tap, and we keep the ranking going. Now back to the numbers. For the 15th greatest player of all time, Yashin appears once more, which is honestly wild for a goalkeeper. 6 extra points for him. Roberto Baggio picks up another vote from Luchat, and Xavi grabs a double dose here too, chosen by both Grok and DeepSeek. The Barcelona genius, the guy who invented tiki-taka on the pitch, is finally getting the love his career deserves. 2 European Championships, a World Cup, for Champions Leagues, so many La Ligas that fans lost count. Xavi was the metronome that ran every big Spanish and Barcelona side for a decade. But the pick that caught me by surprise was Gemini's vote for Eusebio, the Black Panther. Eusebio played most of his career for Benfica, where he won the 1962 European Cup. But more than that, He took home the 1965 Ballon d'Or and led Portugal to the semi-finals of the 1966 World Cup, where he ended the tournament as the top scorer. 9 goals in 6 matches. A god of that era, and one of a very few players from the 60s who can still be measured next to Pelé and Cruyff without looking small. Now for the 14th greatest player of all time, Eusebio returns, this time voted in by Grok. But the other AIs went in wildly different directions. ChatGPT picked Gerd Müller. LeChat, still swinging Italian, chose Maldini. Gemini surprised again with Roberto Baggio in 14th. And DeepSeek went for Van Basten, the Dutchman climbing steadily. Look at this contrast. Gemini placed Xavi in 20th, and now puts Baggio in 14th. That is a 6-position gap for players who won similar levels of trophies, but in different systems. It's already clear that the AIs are not agreeing on how to weigh eras against one another. And it's making the final ranking almost impossible to predict. With these numbers, the table shifts again. Eusebio hits 13 points. Maldini jumps from 9 to 16. Roberto Baggio explodes to 17. Iniesta holds at 18. And Xavi passes everybody, sitting at 19 points and taking the temporary lead. This is only halfway to the top. And half of the biggest names in football have not even shown up yet. Now for the 13th greatest player of all time, a huge name finally enters the conversation. Ferenc Puskás, the Hungarian legend who literally gave his name to the award for the most beautiful goal of the year at FIFA. And when you know his story, you understand why. World Cup runner-up with Hungary in 1954, part of the mythical golden team that changed European football forever. 3-time European Cup winner with Real Madrid, scoring more than 200 goals for the club, including 4 goals in a single European Cup final. That is not a typo. 4 goals. In one final. Grok voted for Puskás here, and DeepSeek agreed. LeChat and Gemini disagreed, and both put Van Basten in this position, giving the Dutchman a huge point boost. If you remember, Van Basten was already picking up votes at 18 and 14. He is one of the most consistent picks of the entire experiment. And you have to think, if injuries had not forced Van Basten to retire at 28 years old, he might have ended up much higher on this list. 3 Ballon d'Ors before 30. Ridiculous. But ChatGPT went in a completely different direction. It voted for George Best, the unforgettable Manchester United winger who won the 1968 European Cup and Ballon d'Or in the same year. George Best was ahead of his time, dribbling like nothing anybody had ever seen, playing football with a rock-star energy that the sport had not experienced yet. He was so influential that his name has become a symbol of what raw talent can look like when it walks into a pitch. And that's why, for the 12th greatest player of all time, George Best gets 2 more votes from Gemini and DeepSeek. LeChat sticks with Puskás, and ChatGPT swings back to Maldini in this spot. Look at what's happening here. Grok placed Maldini 19th. ChatGPT placed him 12th. That is a 7-position gap for the same player. The AIs are already pulling this ranking in 5 different directions. But Grok's 12th pick brought a whole new legend into the room. Michel Platini. This attacking midfielder was so productive that he became the top scorer of Italian Serie A for 3 consecutive seasons, which is almost impossible for a midfielder. He also won the European Championship with France in 1984, where he scored 9 goals in 5 matches, still the record for any single Euros. He captured the Champions League with Juventus. He won the Golden Boot at the Euros. He was such a phenomenon that he ended up winning 3 consecutive Ballon d'Ors. 3 in a row. That's the level. So for the 11th greatest player of all time, Platini appears again, alongside another wave of votes for Ronaldinho, George Best, and Gerd Müller. Look at this. While DeepSeek placed Ronaldinho at 19th, ChatGPT put him at 11th. Another massive difference of opinion. This ranking is a battlefield between the AIs, not a peaceful agreement. And Grok, at 11th, dropped a name that had not appeared yet. Garrincha, or as most people know him, Main Garrincha, the Brazilian winger who spent almost his entire club career at Botafogo. But what really cemented him as a legend was the World Cup story. He won the 1958 World Cup alongside Pelé. And then in 1962, with Pelé injured for most of the tournament, Garrincha carried Brazil to another World Cup title. He finished that World Cup as top scorer, best player, and the most important man in the world of football for a summer. With all these new votes, let's see how the ranking looks. Xavi is still at 19. Platini has tied him with 19. Ronaldo, the Brazilian one who will appear soon, will hit 20. Gerd Muller shoots to 22. Puskás and Maldini are tied at 25. Van Basten sits at 26. And the surprise leader, with a massive 10-point advantage over second place, is George Best. Yeah, George Best is the current number one. And that gap is about to grow even bigger. Now for the 10th greatest player of all time. And Grok once again doubles down on George Best. If you don't believe this ranking is happening, I'll leave receipts down in the description. But George Best was such a talented dribbler, and here comes another name in the same category. Gemini voted for Garrincha at 10, which puts the little Brazilian bird at 11 points and starts pushing him up the table. Meanwhile, Michel Platini shows up twice again at this position. He retired relatively early at just 32 years old, and honestly, if his career had lasted a few more seasons, we might be talking about him in the top 5 instead of fighting for the top 10. But Chat did not vote for him at 10. Instead, the French AI brought a huge new name into the arena. Alfredo Di Stéfano. Di Stéfano played for Real Madrid for 11 years and won 5 European Cups in a row. 5. In a row. Not only that, but he scored in every single one of those finals. Read that again. Every single one of 5 straight European Cup finals. 8 Spanish League titles. 2 Ballon d'Ors. And in 1989, he even took home the Super Ballon d'Or, an award created specifically to name the greatest European player of all time up to that year. His name is spoken with fear in football history books. So for the 9th greatest player of all time, Grok, ChatGPT, and DeepSeek all voted for Di Stéfano. Chat had already voted for him at 10, so now it swung back to Platini in this spot, giving the French genius another bump. And Google Gemini decided to cast its vote for a player who had not appeared yet at all. Ronaldo, the R9, the original one. For a lot of fans, R9 should be way higher than 9th on this list. He became the youngest Ballon d'Or winner in history at 20. He scored 47 goals in a single season for Barcelona. He came back from a career-threatening knee injury to win the 2002 World Cup as top scorer, adding another Ballon d'Or that same year. 3 FIFA World Player of the Year awards. If his knees had held up like his talent did, R9 might be untouchable at the top of every list ever written. But even here, in this AI-driven ranking, he still cracks the top 10. And he will keep appearing. Let's update the standings. Garrincha now has 21 points, which means he passed Cristiano Ronaldo, who has not even been voted yet. That alone tells you something about how much the AIs value historical impact. Van Basten climbs to 28. Maldini sits at 25. George Best has skyrocketed to 47 points, more than double the total of every other player still in the race so far. And the current leader of this whole ranking is Michel Platini, sitting on a monster 53 points. Michel Platini, the Frenchman with 3 consecutive Ballon d'Ors, the temporary king of this ranking. But this is where the giants finally start walking into the room. Because everybody knows that Platini, as great as he is, cannot beat what's coming next. And the AIs know that too. Let's keep going and drop into the 8th greatest player of all time. Now, in the 8th spot, one player picks up 2 votes. Ronaldo, the R9, adds more points to his running total. ChatGPT and DeepSeek both put him here, which finally starts pushing his numbers into legend territory. That's a huge signal because ChatGPT and DeepSeek disagreed on almost everything up to this point, and now they meet on the Brazilian phenomenon. The 2 most different AIs of the group agreeing. That means something. But Gemini threw a name into the pool that would change the shape of the entire top 10. Zinedine Zidane. And that is where things get really, really interesting. Because we all knew Zidane was coming. The question was just how high. Zinedine Zidane, one of the most elegant playmakers this game has ever produced. A player who moved through midfielders like the ball was tied to his feet. Champions League winner with Real Madrid, scoring one of the most iconic volleys in football history in the final at Hampden Park in 2002. Ballon d'Or winner. 3-time FIFA World Player of the Year. 2 goals in a World Cup final in 1998, one of the biggest performances any single player has ever delivered on that stage. And another World Cup final in 2006 sadly ended by that headbutt that Marco Materazzi carried into pension. Gemini rated Zidane 8th, but Grok and ChatGPT went in a completely different direction. They both voted for Franz Beckenbauer. Now, Beckenbauer is a name that a lot of younger fans don't fully appreciate. And this is where the depth of football history starts hitting hard. Beckenbauer was a defender. Or better, he was the defender who invented the modern sweeper role. As captain of Germany and Bayern Munich, he won 3 European Cups in a row. He captured the 1972 European Championship. He lifted the 1974 World Cup on home soil. He finished on the Ballon d'Or podium 3 times and won it twice. As a defender, that has almost never happened in the history of football. The other votes for 8th also went to legendary names. So the field is packed now. Let's see who the AIs voted for as the 7th greatest player of all time. Grok and ChatGPT agreed again, both putting Ronaldo the R9 in 7th, which finally starts stacking his points into serious territory. Chat and DeepSeek went with Zidane. And Gemini swung back and voted for Stéfano, who continues to prove that older legends still hold enormous weight in these AI training sets. The picture is starting to fill out. Stéfano now surpasses Platini and jumps to 61 points. He would be the current leader if it were not for R9, who reaches 66 points and takes over first place in the ranking. Zidane climbs sharply, easily passing Van Basten, though still behind George Best. And Beckenbauer, who had been sitting quietly at 26 points, has not yet exploded. But that is about to change, because for the 6th greatest player of all time, Chat, Gemini, and DeepSeek all voted for Beckenbauer. 3 of the 5 biggest AIs on the planet decided that the German defender belongs in 6th. That is a huge points injection. Meanwhile, Grok voted for Zinedine Zidane. And ChatGPT chose a name that had not appeared at all yet. Johan Cruyff. If there is one player who influenced football history at every level, it was Cruyff. He is the symbol of total football. The tactical philosophy that took the Netherlands to the 1974 World Cup final, where Cruyff scored 1 goal, provided 3 assists, and became the face of a football revolution. Not to mention winning the European Cup with Ajax 3 consecutive times. Not to mention becoming the first player in history to win 3 consecutive Ballon d'Ors. His influence goes far beyond his own playing career. Cruyff invented the football that Pep Guardiola later brought to Barcelona and Manchester City. The football that defines modern Europe. That's why Cruyff carries so much weight in this ranking. Now, if you are enjoying this deep dive, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications because we are entering the top 5 and the next names are the untouchable legends of the game. You do not want to miss what these AIs decided about the podium. Trust me on this one, because now for the 5th greatest player of all time, Grok, Chat, Gemini, and DeepSeek all voted for Cruyff. 4 out of 5 AIs all agreeing. That is the first massive consensus of the entire experiment. The only one that did not put him at 5 was ChatGPT, which went with Zidane instead. And once again, look at this contrast. Gemini placed Zidane at 8th. ChatGPT placed him at 5th. 3 positions apart. The AIs are still fighting. Let's look at the standings before we enter the top 4. Beckenbauer explodes from 26 to 71 points. Zidane reaches 72. Stéfano stays close behind. And Cruyff, thanks to that quadruple vote at 5th, hits 79 points. He becomes the new leader of the ranking. Cruyff, the tactical philosopher, the godfather of modern football, temporarily on top of everybody. But there are still 4 positions to go. And that is where the storm begins. Now we finally reach the top 4. And the very first name here is going to make half of you angry. Because Grok, for the 4th greatest player of all time, voted for Cristiano Ronaldo. Yeah, 4th. For a lot of fans, Cristiano is number 1, hands down. 5 Ballon d'Ors, 5 Champions Leagues. National champion in England, Spain, and Italy, one of the few players to win the domestic title in 3 different top European leagues. 1 European Championship with Portugal. 2 Nations League trophies with Portugal. All-time top scorer of the Champions League by a huge margin. And still approaching 1,000 career goals as we speak. On top of everything, he is the most followed athlete on the planet, which nobody expected when he first walked into Manchester United in 2003, wearing that ridiculous number 7 that he made a legend all over again. And you know what the crazy part is? All the other AIs also placed Cristiano Ronaldo in 4th. That's right. This is the only time the AIs reached a full consensus in the entire experiment. All 5 of them agreeing that Cristiano is the 4th greatest player of all time. Not 3rd, not 2nd, not 1st, 4th. That is a giant statement, because it means that even the most data-driven, calculated, objective machines on the planet believe Cristiano's numbers, trophies, and impact still leave him just behind the top 3 of history. It also means that the very common fan opinion that CR7 is the GOAT is not backed up by the way AI weighs football history. That is going to hurt some people. That is going to make some fans angry. And you know what? That is exactly the kind of debate this video was made to spark. Because if you disagree, drop your position in the comments, and I promise the discussion under this video is going to be more entertaining than half of what happens on TV every weekend. Speaking of which, if you have not already, tap the subscribe button and turn on the bell, because this channel is going to keep dropping these deep dives on players, rankings, and the history of the sport. Every week, another debate. Every video, another twist. You're already halfway through the ranking. Don't miss the top 3. Now let's keep going. Before we get into the votes for the podium, let me give you a quick snapshot of the top 20 as it stands so far, from 20 all the way up to 5th. Because with all these numbers flying around, it's easy to lose track. At 20th, the greatest player ever ranking finishes with Roberto Baggio, the Italian playmaker, sitting on 17 total points. At 19th, right ahead of him, is Andres Iniesta, the Spanish maestro who scored the winning goal in the 2010 World Cup final. At 18th is Xavi Hernandez, and honestly, seeing Xavi that low is one of the biggest shocks of this ranking. Even more shocking is Ronaldinho Gaucho landing at 17th, the most magical player of the 2000s. Only 17th. At 16th, we have Garrincha, sitting on 21 points, just one ahead of the R9 Ronaldo at the very same total. Gerd Muller is at 15th, 22 points. At 14th, Ferenc Puskás with 25, tied with Paolo Maldini at 13th, also 25 points. The Italian legend, the German assassin, and the Hungarian phenomenon all separated by nothing but tiebreaker logic. At 12th, we get Marco van Basten with 26. And here comes the giant gap. Because from 26 points, we jump all the way up to 47, which belongs to George Best at 11th. More than double the points of most players around him. That is how much the AIs love George Best. Michel Platini sits at 10th, still glowing from his 3 consecutive Ballon d'Ors. Then Alfredo Di Stéfano at 9th, with 61 points. The oldest player on this entire ranking, born in 1926, and still respected as one of the greatest of all time. The R9 Ronaldo takes 8th, and you know he could have been much higher if his knees had held up. Franz Beckenbauer is 7th at 71 points, one behind Zinedine Zidane, who takes 6th. That was tight. And at 5th, we have Johan Cruyff with 79 points, the tactical genius who invented modern football before it existed. And then at 4th, the biggest controversy of them all, Cristiano Ronaldo, with 85 points and a full consensus from every single AI in this experiment. 4th. And now we finally step onto the podium. Now this is where things get spicy. The podium of football history. The top 3 greatest players of all time, according to 5 artificial intelligences. And for the 3rd place, Grok voted for Diego Armando Maradona. Maradona, even with fewer statistical numbers than Cristiano Ronaldo, Maradona is a player who made millions of people fall in love with football. In the 1986 World Cup, he single-handedly carried Argentina to the title, with 10 goal involvements in 7 matches, including 2 of the most talked-about goals in the history of the sport. The hand of God, cheeky and controversial. And then for minutes later, the goal of the century. A run of 60 yards, 5 defenders left behind, and a finish that still gets replayed every time somebody talks about the greatest World Cup performances ever. He also reached the final of the 1990 World Cup, dragging that same Argentina team through matches he should not have won. And it wasn't just with the national team. Maradona took Napoli, a small Italian club that had never won a Serie A title in its entire history, and turned them into champions of Italy. Twice. Plus a UEFA Cup. He is still worshipped in Naples like a religious figure. There are murals of him painted on every corner. Bars named after him. Babies named after him. That is the kind of legacy Maradona left behind, and it lives beyond numbers. It lives in myth. So for 3rd place, Grok chose Maradona. And Grok wasn't alone. ChatGPT and Gemini also placed him at 3rd. 3 of the 5 AIs agreed on Diego. But LeChat and DeepSeek disagreed, and the disagreement is where this ranking gets philosophical. LeChat voted for Lionel Messi in 3rd. That's right, Messi in 3rd place on somebody's list. And DeepSeek pulled the boldest move of the entire ranking. It voted for Pelé in 3rd. Think about that. Pelé appearing at 3rd on one list. Messi appearing at 3rd on another. This is where the AIs stop pretending to agree and start showing us their honest disagreement. And that is exactly why this experiment is so fun. Because if even the most powerful data processing systems on the planet cannot agree on the podium, then no fan on Earth is ever going to end this debate at the bar. Let's look at the numbers. Maradona locks up a huge score. And still, with fewer votes at the top than the two remaining names, Maradona finishes third, with 92 points. That is a monster total. That puts him ahead of everybody we have talked about so far in this ranking. Cristiano Ronaldo, sitting at 85 points, is 7 points below Maradona. Cruyff at 79 is 13 points below him. That gap tells you everything about how much the AIs valued the 1986 World Cup and the Napoli miracle. Now, before we move on to the second place, I want you to pause for a second and think about the story we are watching unfold. The AIs analyzed millions of pages of football data. Millions. Every article, every trophy, every statistic, every debate the internet has ever had about who was better. And their conclusion for third place is Maradona. Not Cristiano. Not Zidane. Not Cruyff. Maradona. A player who is not even in the top 3 of all-time goal scorers. A player who never won a Champions League. A player whose entire career is defined more by moments than by trophies. And yet the machines picked him. Because trophies do not tell the whole story of football. Impact does. Fear does. Legacy does. The way a player makes a stadium hold its breath every time he touches the ball, that does. And Maradona had all of that in doses that most players never even taste. So the third place is locked. Diego Armando Maradona, 92 points. Now let's find out who sits ahead of him. Because for second place, the AIs went in 2 completely different directions. And whichever name comes second, the other one becomes the greatest player of all time, according to artificial intelligence. It is either Pelé or Messi. And the room is about to get very quiet. Let's take a breath and look at what this ranking has become. Because before we open the vote for second place, I need you to see the full picture of what the AIs decided from 20th all the way up to 4th. And when you see the names and where they landed, this ranking really starts feeling like a slap in the face of every casual fan. 20th place goes to Roberto Baggio, the Italian playmaker with the famous ponytail. A Ballon d'Or winner, a World Cup finalist, and still only 20th in this AI-driven list. 19th belongs to Andrés Iniesta, the Spanish midfielder who scored the goal that gave Spain their first ever World Cup in South Africa. 18th is Xavi Hernandez, the metronome of that unbeatable Barcelona side. And 17th, brace yourself, is Ronaldinho Gaucho, the most magical player of the 2000s, only 17th. That already tells you how heavy this ranking is. 16th is Main Garrincha, the Brazilian winger who won 2 World Cups, one of them by carrying the team when Pelé was injured. 15th is Gerd Müller, the German goal machine who scored over 500 for Bayern Munich and lifted a World Cup. 14th is Ferenc Puskás, the Hungarian legend whose name is now literally the FIFA award for the goal of the year. 13th is Paolo Maldini, one of the greatest defenders football has ever seen, 5 Champions Leagues on his shelf. 12th is Marco van Basten, the Dutch striker who won 3 Ballon d'Ors before injuries stole his prime. And this is where the ranking gets weird. Because the jump from Van Basten's 26 points to 11th place, which belongs to George Best, sitting on 47 points, is huge. George Best more than doubled the score of the man immediately below him. The AIs love him. Every one of them. 10th is Michel Platini, 3 consecutive Ballon d'Ors, the greatest European midfielder of the 80s. 9th is Alfredo Di Stéfano, the Argentine-Spanish legend of Real Madrid, who won 5 straight European Cups. 61 points. Absolute royalty. 8th is R9 Ronaldo, and I know a lot of you think he should be way higher. If injuries had not brutalized his career, he might be top 3. But even here in 8th, the AIs are giving him the respect he never fully got in his own generation. 7th is Franz Beckenbauer, the German libero who won everything as a player and later everything as a coach. 6th is Zinedine Zidane, elegance in human form, 3 FIFA World Player of the Year awards. 5th is Johan Cruyff, the philosopher of total football, the man who invented modern positional football and taught it to Guardiola, who taught it to the world. And 4th is Cristiano Ronaldo. Cristiano, the only full consensus in this entire experiment. All 5 AIs looked at his career and agreed. He is the 4th greatest of all time. Not the 3rd, not the 2nd, 4th. That is a stone-cold verdict. And whether you love it or hate it, you cannot argue with the fact that every single machine in this experiment saw the same thing. Third place is where Maradona sits on 92 points, an absolute monster total, driven by 3 of the 5 AIs voting for him in the podium. But the second place is where this ranking earns its title, because the second place is where the AIs stop agreeing and start splitting the fan base of world football right down the middle. Because between Pelé and Messi, there is no easy answer. There never has been. One is the man who defined football before television made it global. The other is the man who broke every record after football became a business worth billions. One won 3 World Cups. The other won only one, and it took him until the last chapter of his career to finally hold that trophy. One scored more than 1,000 goals across all competitions. The other has almost 1,300 goal involvements when you add assists to his total. One is worshipped as a symbol of Brazil, the birthplace of Jogo Bonito. The other is worshipped in Argentina, in Catalonia, in Miami, in every stadium that has ever hosted him. And now, for the second greatest player of all time, the AIs cast their votes. For the second place, Luchat and DeepSeek both voted for Diego Maradona, which means for these 2 AIs, Diego is not the third greatest of all time. He is the second. But that vote is going to matter less than you think, because ChatGPT went with a completely different name. ChatGPT voted for Edson Arantes do Nascimento, Pelé. Now, if you have ever had this debate at a bar, you already know the pitch. Football history is divided into 2 eras, before Pelé and after Pelé. He is the only player in history to have won 3 World Cups. He scored in the final of 2 of them. He was such an icon that he took football to parts of the world where the sport did not even exist yet. He scored more than 1,200 career goals. Yes, a lot of them came in friendlies, but back then friendlies were a completely different thing. Many of those friendlies were against European club teams and national squads. Pelé wasn't just scoring in tune-ups. He was destroying full-strength Europe. He didn't win a Ballon d'Or, but only because at the time the Ballon d'Or was awarded exclusively to European players. Years later, France Football did the retroactive math and admitted that Pelé should have won it 7 times. 7 Ballon d'Ors that were never awarded, but which he technically deserved by their own criteria. That alone is enough to put him in the debate. But then you add 3 World Cups. You add the way he changed the marketing and global image of the sport forever. You add the fact that even Cristiano and Messi have publicly said that Pelé is the reason football is what it is today. A legend beyond legends. And for many fans, he is the undisputed number 1. So it should not surprise you that Grok and Google Gemini also placed him in second. 3 of the 5 AIs put Pelé here. Luchat and DeepSeek went with Maradona at second. Nobody put a 5th name here, which means the number 1 spot is now a 2-horse race between the only 2 names still standing. Pelé, sitting on 95 points, for times as many as most of the top 20. And whoever finishes first is going to be, according to the collective judgment of 5 AIs, the greatest football player who has ever lived. Pelé at 95 out of a possible 100 points. He was in the top 3 of almost every AI. He was second on multiple lists. He was first on one of them. His numbers, his impact, and his historical weight almost broke this experiment. And still, he did not finish first. Because for the first place, we finally get the vote we have all been waiting for. Luchat, the French AI, casted its vote for Pelé. That gives Pelé the extra points. For Luchat, Pelé is the GOAT. There is no debate. 3 World Cups end the argument in the eyes of the French system. But ChatGPT disagreed. ChatGPT voted for Lionel Andrés Messi. Now, the case for Messi is huge, and honestly, it has never been stronger than in the last few years. Because if Maradona is remembered for what he did in the 1986 World Cup, Messi did the same thing in 2022. 7 goals, 3 assists. Named man of the match in 5 of the 7 matches Argentina played on the way to the title. 2 goals in a World Cup final that most experts already call the greatest final ever played. Messi didn't just win the World Cup. He owned it. And with that, he crossed the last frontier of his career, the one thing critics used against him for 15 years. But even without that World Cup, his career would already be historic. He is the player with the most titles in football history. 4 Champions Leagues, 2 Copa Americas, 6 European Golden Boots, a record 8 Ballon d'Ors. Nobody else even has 6. And when you add up his goals and assists across his career, you get close to 1,300 goal involvements. Numbers that were unthinkable before he existed. So ChatGPT wasn't alone. Grok, Gemini, and DeepSeek also voted for Messi as the number 1. For AIs. For votes. The verdict is done. The greatest player of all time, according to the collective intelligence of 5 of the most powerful AIs on Earth, is Lionel Messi. 98 points out of a possible 100. Almost a perfect score. 98 points. That is what artificial intelligence, with access to more football data than any human brain could ever process, decided about Lionel Messi. And Pelé, sitting one step below him at 95 points, becomes the second greatest of all time. By 3 points. 3 points, separating the two most sacred names in the history of the sport. So let's stop for a second and appreciate what just happened. Because this ranking did not treat Messi like some casual favorite. The AIs did not just pick him because his name is trendy. They picked him because his career, when broken down piece by piece and compared to every other player who ever lived, ends up ahead of everybody. Pelé, Maradona, Cristiano, Cruyff, everybody. Look at what Messi built. Barcelona was already an elite club when he arrived at La Masia. But over 17 years in the first team, he turned Barcelona into the most dominant football project of the 21st century. 10 La Liga titles. 7 Copa del Rey trophies. For Champions Leagues, including 2 under Pep Guardiola, in the greatest club team of the modern era. He is the all-time top scorer of La Liga, the all-time top scorer of Barcelona, the all-time top scorer of Argentina. He owns almost every offensive record you can think of, and the ones he doesn't own, he has already threatened. And then there's the Argentina story. For years, the criticism against Messi was simple. He couldn't do it for his national team. He kept losing finals. Copa America 2007. Copa America 2015, Copa America 2016, World Cup 2014, where he came within a whisker of the trophy. For finals lost in a row. Every one of them painful. And every time, the same voices would say the same thing. Messi is not Maradona. He is not the leader. He is not the man who carries a country on his back. And then, in 2021, he finally broke through. Copa America in Rio de Janeiro. Beat Brazil in the final. His first major title with Argentina. The whole country cried. And then 1 year later, the Finalissima. And then 6 months after that, the World Cup in Qatar. The one everybody said he needed to be the greatest. And he got it. He got it in the most dramatic final in the history of football against a Kylian Mbappe who tried to steal his moment with a hat-trick, and still, Argentina held on. Messi scored twice in that final. He touched the trophy. And every single argument against him died in that stadium. That is why the AIs put Messi at the top. Not because they love him. Not because they are biased. But because when you feed every metric of football success into the machine, the numbers, the titles, the individual awards, the peak, the longevity, the impact, Messi ends up ahead of everybody. Ballon d'Ors alone tell the story. 8. Nobody else has 6. Cristiano has 5. Platini has 3. Cruyff has 3. Van Basten has 3. Messi has 8. That is not a small gap. That is a Grand Canyon. Now let me remind you where we ended up in the whole ranking. Because after 20 positions and thousands of years of collective football history, the AIs delivered their verdict. 20th, Roberto Baggio. 19th, Andres Iniesta. 18th, Xavi Hernandez. 17th, Ronaldinho Gaucho. 16th, Main Garrincha. 15th, Gerd Muller. 14th, Ferenc Puskás. 13th, Paolo Maldini. 12th, Marco van Basten. 11th, George Best. 10th, Michel Platini. 9th, Alfredo Di Stéfano. 8th, R9 Ronaldo. 7th, Franz Beckenbauer. 6th, Zinedine Zidane. 5th, Johan Cruyff. 4th, Cristiano Ronaldo, with 85 points and a full consensus from every AI. 3rd, Diego Armando Maradona, with 92 points. 2nd, Edson Arantes do Nascimento, Pelé, with an almost unbelievable 95 points, just 3 away from the top. And first, at the top of it all, sitting on 98 points out of a maximum of 100, is Lionel Andres Messi. The greatest football player of all time, according to the collective intelligence of 5 artificial minds. It doesn't matter what your gut told you. It doesn't matter which era you grew up watching. This is the verdict. And this is the ranking that a lot of people are going to hate. But this is what the numbers, the data, and the history say. Now, the fun part of any ranking like this is not the ranking itself. It's the conversation that comes after. And you know exactly where that conversation happens. Right below this video in the comments. So let's move into the closing, and I'll leave you with the questions that are going to make this comment section absolutely explode. Now, before you scroll down to leave your take, let's zoom out for one final moment. Because what these 5 AIs delivered is not just a list. It is a mirror of how football history is being remembered right now, in this exact era. And that matters because every generation gets to build its own memory of the game. And this ranking is that memory captured by machines that read everything. Think about what this list is telling us. 15 out of the top 20 greatest players of all time played most of their careers before the year 2000. Only 5 active-era players cracked this ranking. Iniesta at 19th, Xavi at 18th, Ronaldinho at 17th, Cristiano Ronaldo at 4th, and Lionel Messi at 1st. That is the modern era's contribution to the top 20. 5 names, and 2 of them fighting for the podium. Which means that the AIs still respect football history far more than most fans do. When you scroll through social media and see people arguing about GOAT status, most of the debate is Messi versus Ronaldo, sometimes with Neymar or Mbappe thrown in as jokes. But the AIs are here to remind us that Cruyff invented modern football, that Beckenbauer redefined defending, that Di Stéfano built the Real Madrid myth, that Pelé took the sport out of South America and gave it to the world, that Maradona pulled off the most impossible individual World Cup in history. These names are not decorations. They are the foundation of everything. And the biggest lesson from this ranking is that no matter how much football data you feed a machine, the debate is never fully closed. 5 of the most advanced AIs in the world could not agree on the podium. 3 of them said Pelé is the greatest. 1 said Messi. 1 said Maradona. 1 even said Cristiano should be 3rd and not 4th, deep in the point tallies. If artificial intelligence cannot end this argument, no fan on earth ever will. And that is the beauty of the sport. It refuses to be solved. So now it is your turn. Do you agree with the AIs, or do you think they got it completely wrong? Because I have to hear this from you. First question, where would you put Cristiano Ronaldo? 4th, like the AIs decided, or higher? And if higher, who exactly do you drop out of the top 3 to make room for him? Because saying Cristiano is number 1 is easy. Naming who falls off is where the real debate starts. Second question, do you buy the idea that Pelé and Messi are the top 2 with Maradona just below them? Or is Maradona still the true number 1 for you, no matter what the numbers say? Because the 1986 World Cup argument is one that data cannot fully measure. And I want to know if the emotional case still wins for you. Third question, which name in this top 20 should not be there at all? Because every list has that one pick that feels off. Maybe you think George Best doesn't belong in the top 11. Maybe you think Ronaldinho at 17th is a crime against football. Maybe you think Modric or Mbappe should have made the cut. Drop the name and tell me who you would put in their place. And be specific. The comments section becomes electric when we start naming names. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the greatest players of all time, do the 3 things that make this channel keep growing. Hit that like button because it tells YouTube this kind of football content deserves more eyes. Tap the subscribe button and turn on the bell because next week we are dropping another ranking that is going to make even more noise than this one. And drop your top 3 in the comments right now. First name, second name, third name. Just those 3. That is all I need to see how divided this audience really is. Because the truth is, every fan carries their own top 3 inside their heart. And no AI, no data set, no ranking video is ever going to change that. But that is exactly why we keep having this conversation. And that is exactly why football is the greatest sport in the world. So thanks for watching. See you in the next one. And whatever your top 3 is, own it, defend it, and let the world hear it. Because football history is being written right now, and you are one of the voices that gets to shape it.